Psalm 95 is a clear invitation to worship. In fact, the first word of the psalm is come, and that word come will occur 3 times. 3 invitations to come and worship. The Latin word for come is venite, as in, O come all ye faithful, venite adoramus. That's the first word of the psalm, and so traditionally this psalm has been titled Venite, come, an invitation to worship. Like the other psalms in Book 4, Psalms 91 through 100, these are all psalms that would have been used in corporate worship, and they follow the structure of a hymn. There you see that command that to come. Oh, come, let us sing. Come into his presence with thanksgiving. There'll be another one of those in verse 6. One of the features of hymns that we see is that they will answer the basic questions, the what, where, when, why, how, who questions. And so on several of these psalms, I will give you those words to suggest how this psalm is organized. In this case, we begin with a what. What are we to do? Well, we are to sing and make a joyful noise. Why are we to do that? Because the Lord is a great God, the great King above all gods. We express our worship with joy, with emotion, with passion, with energy. And so verses 1 and 2 suggest that aspect of who we are. We are emotional. That is part of our nature. And so it seems perfectly appropriate to do that in worship. Verse 3 draws our attention to worshiping God with our reason, with our mind, with our intellect, to look around and ask the question, who are we worshiping, and how do we know that he is worthy of worship? Notice that he says that the psalmist says that God is the great King above all gods, suggesting that there are other gods. Yahweh is not the only God. He is just the great God. He is the one above all gods. It's not really a pure monotheism, but it's a recognition of the fact that we all worship something or someone. That's always been true. It's in the nature of human beings to worship things. A lot of those things are not worthy of worship. The psalmist is asserting here that God is the great God. He is worthy of our worship because he is above all others. Worship is assigning ultimate value to God in a way that engages our entire being. Assigning ultimate value is what the psalmist is doing here. He is saying, God, you are the King above all gods. You are the God whom I worship above all else. I value you above all else. And he engages his entire being in that, his emotion, his intellect, and in verses 6 and 7, we'll see that he engages his will in that. Now, why is God worthy? Why is he the great King? Well, in his hand are the depths of the earth. The heights of the mountains are also his. So first, the earth is demonstrative of this, that God formed the depths of the earth, the lowest places. In fact, Israel is home to the lowest place on earth, the Dead Sea region. Perhaps this is also a reference to caves. In fact, that's probably more likely. The deepest, darkest caves that were difficult then and now to explore, as well as the heights of the mountains. Mountain climbing, the higher you go, the riskier it is. And so the most unreachable parts of the earth, the psalmist says, belong to God. He is there. He formed them. And so we see this is kind of a vertical look, an up and down, the depths down, the heights up. And then in contrast to that, the sea is his, for he made it, that his hands formed the dry land. This is the horizontal dimension. We have sea level worldwide. So that's east to west in every direction as you travel. Eventually, you're going to hit the sea. You're going to hit ocean. And God made all of this, and his hands formed the dry land. Notice the use of the word hand. Hand will occur 3 times in this psalm as well. His hands are the depths of the earth, and his hands formed the dry land. Moving on to the next movement of the psalm, verses 6 and 7 offer us the third invitation. Come, let us worship and bow down. Here it's not the words so much of worship. It's not the singing and the shouting and the thinking, but it rather is the bending of the will and the physical posture that represents that, the bowing down, the prostration before the Lord, our Maker. That's the what we are to do. We're to come and bow down and kneel. The why is because he is our God. We're the people of his pasture, the sheep of his hand. We have the third use of the word hand there as well. This is not a new metaphor. The Lord is my shepherd, Psalm 23. Psalm 80 also speaks of God as shepherd, as well as Psalm 74. So common theme here, that we are the sheep of his hand, the flock under his care. So that is why we need to submit to him in his leadership. He is the one who guides the flock with his staff and his rod. Our third movement of this psalm turns a little dark. In fact, when this psalm is used in liturgical settings and worship, sometimes we'll just want to end with verse 7 because it turns a little dark here. And here is the what. What are we to do? We are to not harden our hearts. Today, if you hear his voice, and hopefully when we gather to worship, we will hear the voice of God. And the wisdom here is to listen to that and not harden your hearts. And the psalmist then takes us back to the wilderness wanderings of the nation of Israel at times when they cried out for water or for food, or they exercised unbelief. They were testing God. Put me to the proof. Though they had seen my work, they had literally walked through the Red Sea. They had seen the plagues poured out on Egypt, yet they didn't trust God in the wilderness. And as they're prepared to enter the promised land, they send spies out ahead, you'll recall, and they send 12 spies, and 10 of them come back and say, hey, this is an awesome place. It's exactly like God promised. Problem is they're giants, and we can't do it. We can't take them. So we're just going to stay here in the desert. Now, there were 2 spies who felt otherwise, but they were overruled. And as a result of that, Israel was punished by spending 40 years wandering in the wilderness until all of that generation had passed away and a new generation would enter the land. And so God was angry with that generation, and he said, they're not going to enter my rest. They're not going to experience rest because they have not put their trust in me. Now, the writer of Hebrews picks up on this, as you can see in these references, and here's the larger context. And he says the same thing is true of us as Christians. He warns us against the lure of faithlessness and the hardening of sin in light of the hardships that we're going to experience. And the writer of Hebrews, of course, is experiencing a time of persecution, and he is encouraging them not to give up, not to become faithless as their ancestors did, but to listen to the voice of God and not harden their hearts. And it's a reminder to us that what is offered to us is not a promised land in the physical sense, a life that's free from difficulty and is filled with abundance. No, the rest that God offers us is what we could call the gospel rest. It is the rest of knowing that we're not saved by our works, that we're saved by the grace of God, by the work of Jesus Christ. And so we should enter into that rest, the gospel rest that says, I don't have to earn my salvation. I don't have to be perfect, but I can trust in the perfect sacrifice of Jesus and enter into his rest. And so let's understand it in that way, that is the rest that he is talking about. He is saying, don't lose your faith. Don't give up. Don't go back into salvation by works, and don't walk away from God in a time of hardship, but rather put your trust in him. Listen to his voice. As a sheep surrenders to the leadership of a shepherd, kneel, bow down, and trust in the hand of our good shepherd.